My earlier memoir, Filming If, described my unforgettable experience in 1968 as a young actor lucky enough to be chosen by the director Lindsay Anderson to play a major role in what was to become an iconic British film. The positive reaction to that book has encouraged me to write about more of my acting highlights. I've been fortunate enough to work with several movie greats, never as a star, but as a supporting player and as an occasional writer. My only visit to Hollywood in 1990 lasted a mere 5 days, during which I had terrible toothache and my younger daughter's hair turned green. But despite this, my brushes with Hollywood personalities and productions have provided unforgettable memories throughout my acting and writing career. As a child, growing up in Surrey and later in Sussex, Hollywood meant Disney. I remember crying when Bambi's mother died, and the animated Cinderella stayed with me strongly enough to influence my decision when writing my own version years later to omit the Buttons character and substitute him as Cinderella's friend with Disney-style mice. Some of the first songs I learnt to sing while my father accompanied me on the piano were from Disney's Alice in Wonderland, and when I wrote and produced my first puppet shows at the age of 10, Minnie Mouse was a featured character. I remember, too, developing an interest in wildlife, thanks largely to Disney's The Living Desert and The Vanishing Prairie, which wove together stories with facts about the animal kingdom. Little did I then know that I would in the future have some extraordinary dealings with Disney. Saturday morning cinema was never part of my early life, but in my teens I enjoyed the big Hollywood musicals like The King and I and South Pacific. And although I didn't perhaps understand the sexual implications of Gigi, I loved the songs. This came in handy when some years later I was asked to sing the title song at my audition for Andrew Lloyd Webber's musical Jeeves. It won me the role of Bingo Little. Seeing the British musicals Salad Days and Oliver influenced my subsequent writing more than the Hollywood blockbusters. As for comedy, I preferred British humour like Carry On Sergeant to American films like Some Like It Hot, which was to appeal more as I grew older. But once we had a television, first rented in time for the coronation in 1953, the American sitcoms like I Love Lucy and I Married Joan were unmissable. These included a considerable amount of physical comedy, with the actors shot full length rather than in close-up. John Cleese was to use a similar technique years later in his Fawlty Towers. I think it was the theatricality of this style that appealed to me as my interest in performing was developing. At school, it was often the films we were considered too young to see that attracted our attention the most. We were not permitted to witness the charms of Brigitte Bardot in And God Created Woman, or the terror of the Janet Leigh shower scene in Psycho. The Camp on Blood Island was another forbidden X-rated film in 1958 from Hammer that featured cruelties handed out by the Japanese in a prison camp in Malaya. At the age of 14, my friend Patrick and I decided we wanted to see it. And to do so, our elaborate plan involved secretly going to see an approved film, The Vikings, after school one day, without telling our parents. Then, on a Saturday, we announced to our parents that we were going to see The Vikings at the Odeon Bognor Regis, but instead went to the matinee of the violent film at the Picturedrome. Returning home, we were able to talk about The Vikings from the earlier viewing, and our parents never found out the truth. A couple of years later, Pat and I were legitimately able to see Dr No, the first James Bond film. I don't think it made much of an impression because I've never felt inclined to see any subsequent James Bond movies, despite their massive success. And I've never seen a Star Wars film, as science fiction has never grabbed me. My writing and adapting have often used fantasy, but I've always favoured stories where the fantasy springs from reality.